Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Helen McDaid with Fáilte Ireland's Enterprise Support Team, and you're all very welcome to the webinar this morning. Now, we have an exceptionally large audience today, as I know there were well over 2,000 people registered, which I think is a pretty good indicator of just how important the CRSS is to all of you and to your businesses, and really to the sustainability of tourism businesses across the country as we move through the various levels of the Living with COVID plan and restrictions are imposed and lifted. Now, I would like to really acknowledge at this point that we know not all tourism businesses are eligible. Tourism is such a diverse sector that unfortunately many don't meet the criteria, but Fáilte Ireland has been and will continue to work closely with the Departments of Finance and Revenue to clarify the eligibility in various circumstances. And I really like to thank them for their time and assistance as they have been flat out the last 4 weeks kind of creating this scheme from scratch. Now, Fáilte Ireland is also currently assessing the various mechanisms that we can use to address some of these gaps that the businesses aren't eligible with the additional funding that was allocated to us in Budget 2021. So we'll keep you up to details on that, up to date on that as things are finalised. Now, saying that, a huge number of businesses are eligible. So the purpose of today's session is really to provide you with the information you need to navigate and leverage the scheme. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome our panels from both the Revenue Commissioners and the Department of Finance, who are the absolute experts on this scheme and have been working away on it since it was first announced. So with us today, we have Anne-Marie Walsh, and Anne-Marie is the Principal Officer in the Tax Policy Unit in the Department of Finance. And Anne-Marie is the lead on CRSS in the department, and then she works closely with the Revenue on the Finance Bill, which will contain all the legislative underpinning for the scheme. Now, we also are joined by Katie Clare, who's the Principal Officer in the Collector General's Division. And Katie's the operational manager for the CRSS scheme. And Katie's going to be going through all of the details of the scheme today. And then we also have Jackie O'Callaghan. Now, Jackie's actually dialing in with us by phone. And Jackie is the Principal Officer with the Revenue Commissioners. And Jackie's kind of on the legal end of things and looks after the Business Taxes Policy and Legislation Division, the Business Income Tax and Incentive Branch, and she also has responsibility for the CRSS. Now, Jackie's division will be the one that works closely with the Department of Finance on the production of the annual finance bill and also prepares all the legislation to give effect to the decisions made by the Minister of Finance and the government that brings this all into place. So now sorry ladies, you're all very welcome.
Thank you.
So now, just before we get into the session itself, 8 months into COVID, I know you're all webinar pros at this point, but if you just bear with me, I want to cover off on a few of the logistics. So the session this morning will last probably about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. Now, I'll pass over to Anne-Marie in just a few seconds to say a few words just about the overall kind of context of the scheme. Then Katie's going to cover all of the practicalities about how you go making claims, a lot of the details around eligibility, etc. And then the remainder of the session is going to be spent on the Q&A, and Jackie and Anne-Marie will kind of be handling a lot of the questions around that. Now, as we talk about questions, I'd like to say really a huge thanks to all of you who submitted questions as you registered, because we use those to really form the basis of the presentation. So a lot of the queries will be covered as Katie goes through the slides, but you can still submit questions as we go. So just a couple of quick points on that. Like the panelists, they're not going to be able to answer very business specific questions, as they probably need more detail than be covered here. And as Jackie, I'm sure will mention, this is a very new scheme, so a lot of the kind of the nuances are being worked out. But Katie will cover in hers how you can raise queries with Revenue, so you'll be able to follow up that way. And then last but not least, I'll try and get through as many questions as we possibly can. But with the best will in the world, with the size of audience, we might not get through them all. But after the session, we'll pull together an FAQ for the ones that haven't been answered with the panel or the presentations, and then we'll put that up on the Fáilte Ireland Support Hub. So ask away. Now we're also recording the session, and that'll go up in the Support Hub as well with a copy of the slide deck, so you'll have all of the information there to hand. So look, I think that's all of the logistics out of the way. So without further ado, Anne-Marie, I'll pass over to you, and then if you can hand over to Katie, then I'll come back in for the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Helen. Good morning, everybody. As Helen has introduced, I'm Anne-Marie Walsh, work in the Department of Finance, and we've been working on this scheme for the last number of weeks with the announcement on Budget Day, and now preparing the legislation and bringing it through the Houses. So I think it'd be useful this morning to give some background and context to the scheme. So the scheme is very much linked to the government's Living with COVID plan. And the restrictions at the various levels of that plan have the effect of closing premises, and the CRSS scheme is intended to mitigate the effects of these closures. The Minister and Government are very cognizant of the effects of these closures on certain businesses, and in particular those that have been affected since the onset of the pandemic. The CRIS is designed as economy-wide support that will be available to qualifying businesses at a time when they cannot provide their goods or services to customers, or can only do so at a limited extent as a direct consequences of the public health restrictions that the government has imposed. The payment is intended to enable businesses and help them with normal fixed costs such as rent, insurance and so on associated with the premises. In designing the scheme and providing for it in legislation, it was necessary to link it to the Living with COVID plan, which prevent or significantly restrict access to a business premises. The scheme is seen as a very important element in the various supports that have been put in place over the course of the year to assist businesses. So as such, it's meant to complement and be additional to existing schemes like the Employee Wage Subsidy Scheme, the warehousing of tax liabilities and commercial rates waivers. My revenue colleagues will outline the details of the scheme, but the primary qualifying criteria for the CRIS is that a business premises is either closed or access by customers is restricted directly due to government public health requirements. Thanks. I'll hand over to Katie now.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So I deal in revenue with the operational aspect of the scheme, and we have a lot to cover today. I want to deal primarily with the eligibility criteria, and just to explain, I suppose, the types of businesses or the types of entities that qualify for the scheme. I will just run quickly through the agenda. So I want to give an overview, a brief overview of the scheme itself, and then deal with some of the very specific questions that have come in that Helen has forwarded to ourselves. We've taken those and we want to just detail the types of businesses that do qualify for the scheme and give some examples around that, which will hopefully help you in deciding whether or not you do qualify for this particular scheme. I'll speak then about how to apply and the specifics in our ROSS system. There's a two-stage process. We have both a registration and a claim process. So I want to just explain the difference and just to explain how to go about registering and how to go about making a claim. I'll speak then about the payment itself, how much is due and how the claim is calculated and how it will be paid. Then we will have time at the end for some questions and answers. So next, the scheme itself was published in the Finance Bill 2020, and as Anne-Marie was outlining, the intent of the scheme, or the reason that the scheme is in place, is as a targeted support for businesses significantly impacted by the restrictions introduced by the government under the Living with COVID plan. So in general, the scheme will operate when level 3 or higher is in place, and it will cease when the registrations are lifted. So qualifying businesses can apply to revenue for a cash payment, which is called an advanced credit for trading expenses, for the period of the restrictions. So while the restrictions are in place, the scheme will operate from the 13th of October 2020 until the 31st of March 2021, and it operates on the basis of self-assessment. So it's important at this stage to mention that the information provided today and the information currently available in respect of the scheme is based on proposed legislation contained in the Finance Bill as initiated. So in respect of the eligibility criteria, there's a lot to cover in this area. So This slide gives an overview of the main eligibility criteria. So we will go through them in some detail, but I just want to call them out at the start. So the first 3 bullet points really define the type of entity that does qualify for the scheme. So we're talking about companies or self-employed individuals, or partnerships who are carrying on a trade or trading activity, either solely or in partnership, and the profits of which are chargeable to tax under Case 1 Schedule D. So really that defines the types of businesses that we have. And I will go through that in a bit more detail in respect of the trading criteria. But if those 3 bullet points really define the entities that will qualify. You need to have fixed business premises, which is located in a region subject to restrictions in line with the Living with COVID-19 plan. And those restrictions must require that your business is prohibited or considerably restricted from accessing the business premises. So in terms of the questions you might ask in deciding whether or not you qualify, you need to decide, does your business operate from a fixed premises? And more critically, do your customers attend your business premises to access your trade? Are those customers then restricted from accessing your premises due to the COVID-19 restrictions? So those 2 bullet points deal with the premises aspect of it. And then finally, the turnover test. So the turnover test is that your turnover must be reduced to 25% or less than your normal turnover. So your turnover by comparison to 2019. So next. So if we consider the trading requirement, to avail of the business, the profits and gains must be chargeable to tax under Case 1 of Schedule D. So what that means is that professions, for example, don't qualify for the scheme. So that would mean accountants, dentists, or any other service providers of those types of professions. Neither do businesses who are exempt from tax qualify. So certain entities such as not-for-profit, charitable bodies, sports organisations, if they're not chargeable to tax under Case 1 Schedule D, well then that means that they will not qualify for the scheme. Now, we did have a question in advance of the seminar where we were asked, does a business actually need to be making profits in order to qualify? So just to be clear on that one, the requirement here is for the trade to be carried on, and the profits or gains arising from the trade should be chargeable to tax. But there is no requirement for the business to be necessarily making a profit once the above criteria have been met. So next. So the business premises requirement is, I suppose, one of the most specific requirements. And what that means is that the scheme is only applicable where the business activity is ordinarily carried on in a business premises, which is a building or a physical fixed structure. So there's 2 aspects to be considered. Is the business carrying on a trade from a business premises, and is that business premises a fixed physical structure? So what we would expect to see there, or what would constitute a business premises for Chris generally, would be hotels, bars, pubs, restaurants, cafes. And what would not constitute a business premises would be mobile premises, those which are not physically fixed in place. So boats, taxis, trucks, vans. And similarly, we got a question in advance, and it was, are boats eligible? So the cruisers or any seafaring vehicle do not qualify for the scheme because they're not considered a business premises for the purposes of Chris. So a boat, even one which is physically moored, or permanently moored, would not constitute a physical fixed structure. So similarly, a boat tour does not qualify, even where there is a physical ticket booth. Because in these circumstances, under the terms of the legislation, no business activity is taking place from the ticketing or public sales office itself. So boats, barges, cruises are operating as tours, bars or restaurants, they do not qualify for the scheme. We were also asked in advance about bus tours, bike tours, or surf schools. So again, those do not qualify. The business activity is not taking place from a fixed business premises. So whilst there may be some physical structures, such as say changing areas or a structure to hold equipment or a reception area, the business activity is not taking place in those units. So for the purposes of CRIS, those businesses will not qualify. So next, the seasonal businesses. The seasonal businesses, I suppose, is particularly relevant for this sector. So we have a lot of businesses that would not ordinarily operate during the winter months. The terms of the scheme still stand for seasonal businesses, and in particular the 25% turnover test. So a seasonal business would have to demonstrate that because of the restrictions, because of the living with COVID restrictions, the turnover of the business in the period for which the restrictions are in operation would be no more than 25% of an amount equal to the average weekly turnover for 2019. So if a business, the scheme has only been in operation since the 13th of October, and businesses who are subject to government restrictions from that day onwards are eligible to claim. So that's particularly important for a seasonal business, because if a seasonal business is not currently or is not ordinarily operated since the 13th of October, that business would not be in a position to demonstrate that turnover would be reduced because of government restrictions. However, some businesses, as we understand it, have decided that to compensate for the lack of business throughout the summer periods, that they have decided to open during the winter months to compensate for the lack of trade during the summer months. So if that was the case, the business should be able to demonstrate that they did intend to open, or that they had opened at the 13th of October, and they would be able to demonstrate that through evidence of customer bookings, cancellations, staff who had to be let go, suppliers who had to be notified, and where that can be demonstrated and all of the other eligibility criteria are met, such as the premises criteria, well then the business will qualify. So in order to qualify for the scheme, one of the other criteria is that the business must intend to resume trading when the restrictions are lifted. And if the business can if they can demonstrate that they do intend to resume trading, and even if this is not until the 2021 season, and that this is in line with their historical trading pattern, well then the intention to trade or the intention to resume trade criteria is met. So next, the restriction requirement. So it is important that, I suppose, at level 5, this is quite clear, but maybe at the lower levels, at level 4, level 3, these criteria become possibly a bit more difficult or a bit more nuanced. So a business can make a claim for the scheme from the point at which that business is formally restricted. So general public health advice around the implementation of social distancing and general protective measures does not constitute formal restriction for the purposes of CRIS. So if you're not formally restricted by the government restrictions that have been brought in to either significantly restrict customers accessing your trade or to close down, well then you do not satisfy that particular criteria. So the turnover amount is to do with the 25%. Next. So the turnover test I've mentioned briefly, and it is I suppose a test of turnover that your turnover for the period for which you're restricted, the claim period, is 25% of less of your weekly turnover for your relevant period. So for most established businesses, which are those who were in operation prior to the 26th of December 2019, that will mean your weekly turnover during 2019. For new businesses, the turnover test is carried out against your weekly turnover for a period in 2020 from when you started trading up until the 12th of October 2020. So next. So again, I suppose the types of business activities which are generally within the scope of the scheme would be the accommodation providers in particular. So the hotels, B&Bs and the guest houses, bars, pubs, restaurants and cafes, indoor cultural attractions. So the museums, galleries, cinemas, theatres and some types of other types of indoor visitor attractions. So we have the distilleries, amusement arcades. So these are, I suppose, indicative broad categories that may be relevant to you. Each business, it must determine their own eligibility in their own right. But in general terms, these are the types of businesses that we expect to access the scheme. Next, the types of businesses which are not within the scope of the scheme would be the tour companies, so the bikes, the buses and the boating tours, some of the outdoor attractions and the pop-up or mobile businesses, so the outdoor markets and many of the outdoor events and activities where your business is based on walking tours or hiking tours, they do not qualify. I've also included here some detail around the ticket booths and the sales office just to provide clarity. So while you may have a physical ticketing booth or reception office or a sales office, the business activity is not being carried out in that structure. So for the purposes of the scheme, that does not constitute a fixed physical structure. So next. So in terms of how to apply for the scheme where you do qualify, there are two processes, or there are two stages to making a claim. The first stage is the registration process. So the process is exclusively through ROS, through our ROS system. And then the second process is to do with the claim. So you must register first, and once you've successfully registered, you will be able to make a claim. Now, I am conscious that many of you will have a tax agent or an accountant who will carry out this work for you, but from speaking to Fáilte Ireland, it was thought that there's a significant cohort who will do this work themselves, so it's worth taking the time to just go through some of the screens and look at the detail around how to register for the scheme and how to make a claim. So in respect of how to register, you're asked at the registration process for some information. So you're asked for your business premises name and address, your sector, your turnover information, and some of your VAT information. And as I mentioned at the outset, the scheme runs on the basis of self-assessment. So there is a declaration to be made at both the registration stage and the claim stage around the eligibility, the terms and conditions of the scheme, to confirm that the information is correct and that you are indeed eligible for the scheme. So the first screen that you'll see is when you log into ROS is your ROS home screen. You click in to manage your tax registrations, and then you will see the COVID restriction support scheme, and you can click there to select register. So at this stage, it's important to note that you must have an up-to-date tax clearance certificate in order to successfully register. So if you don't have a tax clearance certificate, you can apply through ROS to gain your tax clearance. There are guidelines available online as to how to do that. And so you will not have access to any of these screens if you don't have tax clearance. So that's the first thing to note. Once you get to the first registration screen, you're going to be asked for your business and premises name, your AIR code, and some of the detail. Now, the scheme is based on premises, and while many of you will be operating as a group, it's important to note at this stage that the premises is particularly important when it comes to running this scheme. So even in many instances where a business has more than one premises, it's important that you input the details of all of your premises, even where some of those premises will not qualify for the scheme. So for example, if you have a shop and you also have a pub on 2 different sites, and your pub is closed due to government restrictions, but your shop remains open, it's still important that you input the details of both the pub and the shop. And when you get to the claim stage, you will only claim in respect of the pub. But it's important at this stage, at the registration stage, to input the detail of both. So once you've input that information, you will be asked for some of your accounting detail, so some of your financial detail from the 2019 year. So you're asked for your weekly turnover exclusive of VAT, your VAT on sales figures for 2019, and your income other than your trading income for 2019. Now, this is for an existing business who is in operation before the 26th of December 2019. So for new businesses, for new businesses, the information will be similar, but it'll ask for your financial details up until from the date you started trading until the 12th of October 2020. So then the declaration piece is the last piece, and that's where you're asked to declare that your business does comply with the terms of the scheme and that you are eligible based on the eligibility criteria that we have outlined. So the claim process then is once you've successfully registered, you can move through to the claim process. And I suppose it's important to note, first of all, that there are a number of updates and validation checks that have to happen on the part of revenue before you can move from registration straight to the claim process. And these will happen as quickly as possible. But even in terms of technology, it does take some time and it won't be available to you automatically, but it's expected that it would be available to you relatively quickly. So you select the business premises for which you want to make the claim. So again, access is through ROS. You input the relevant details of the claim. So you will need to know the business premises, the claim period start date, and the bank details. So I'm just going to run through the claim screens. So next, so you must first select a tax. This is through the e-repayment system when you log into ROS. So you select your tax. In this instance, you're going to select Chris, and then it will take you through, are you eligible, and some of the steps that are required, and then you're asked for the claim details. So at this stage, you input the business premises that you input at the registration stage will be available to you here, so you can select whichever ones you want to select. For most businesses, we expect that will just be one business premises, and you will make that selection and input the claim start date and the claim end date. So next, so you get a summary of what it is that you have claimed, and then you click continue. And then I just want to draw your attention to the bank details. So at this stage, you will need to include your bank details. It's particularly important that these are correct, because we already have instances where they are incorrect, and that leaves us with having to stop the claim and having to contact the customer directly, which leads to administrative delay. So we do ask that you take the time to ensure that those bank details are correct. So you get a final summary of the claim, and then you continue on through your declarations and you submit your claim. So in respect of the payment and the amount that you will be expecting to receive from the scheme, the payment is known as the advance credit for trading expenses, and it is calculated in respect of the weekly amount based on the turnover for your business for a prior period. So for most businesses, that would be for 2019. The amount is calculated at 10% of your average weekly turnover up to a maximum of €20,000. And where figures exceed €20,000, 5% will be payable on the balance. Now, we have a number of questions in respect of the tax treatment of the CRIS payment, and specifically, will the ACTE be taken into account when calculating taxable trading profits? Now, the answer to that is yes, it will be taken into account when you are in respect of your taxable trading profits. It'll be treated to a large extent like other grants. So any grants or similar that you would be in receipt of, that the ACTE will be considered similar. However, an ACTE will reduce the amount of trading expenses that are deductible in computing your taxable income. It will not result in any additional tax liability where you're in a loss-making position. So an ACTE will have the effect of reducing your trading losses, but it will not result in any extra liability where you're in a loss-making position. So it's only if you're in a profit-making position that it would have any impact. So next. We have a few examples here that we hope would be relevant for the Fáilte Ireland audience. So in particular, the large pub on the Wild Atlantic Way. So if a pub with a turnover of 910,000, the weekly turnover for 2019 would be 17.5, and 10% of that would be 1,750, which would be a weekly payment due per week since the 13th of October. So that will be payable whilst the restrictions are in place and while those restrictions prohibit customers accessing your premises. So a large hotel in Dublin with a turnover of 12.3 million. In that circumstance, the weekly turnover is 236,000, and the payment will be made at 10% on the first 20,000 of the weekly turnover, and 5% after that. But there is a cap, so it is subject to a cap of 5,000 per week. So in this case, the cap would be 5,000 per week. So the restaurant in Athlone with a turnover of 1.6, the weekly turnover would be 31,000, 32,000, and the payment is 10% on the first 20,000 of weekly turnover. So that works out at 2,000, and then 5% of the balance, which is €587. So you're talking about 2,500 per week since the start of October. So next, so we've included a few examples here, similar examples, just to highlight that the government supports available. We have had questions, if you're in receipt of other government subsidies or other government payments, does that preclude you from access to the scheme? And it doesn't. All of these schemes the eligibility criteria stand in their own right. So if you're in receipt, say, for example, of the pandemic unemployment payment or the wage subsidy scheme, that does not necessarily preclude you from access to this, to the CRIS scheme. So in this particular example, the government supports available that are administered through revenue would be the wage subsidy scheme, the CRIS scheme, and we also have the facility to warehouse some of your tax liability. So the example is the 910,000, 21 employees in August 2020. So in this, there are eligibility criteria to be met. There must, the same standard eligibility criteria for the CRIS scheme. There must be significant restrictions on members of the public accessing your business premises. The turnover during restrictions must be no more than 25% of the 2019 average weekly turnover. And you must have tax clearance. So your pub must be up to date with their tax obligations in terms of filing your returns. So in that instance, or in the example that we've given here, with the approximate payment would be 2,300 on the temporary wage subsidy scheme, which was in place previously, and about 2,000 on the wage subsidy scheme, and 1,750 for CRIS. But there's also a significant amount that could be warehoused in terms of tax liability owing. So that's an amount that can be warehoused for a 12-month period where you will not be subject to any level of enforcement, and you will not be charged any interest or penalties on that amount. So the next example we have there is a hotel, and it's the very large hotel. So again, we have the temporary wage subsidy scheme, the wage subsidy scheme, and the CRIS scheme. So there's significant supports there from the schemes that are administered directly by revenue. The last example there is the restaurant, and the restaurant has a turnover of 1.6 or 1.7 million, and again the CRIS payment there is about 2,500, but there are the wage subsidy scheme, and there is a significant benefit to be gained there in respect of warehousing. So next. So I'd mentioned at an earlier stage that tax clearance is particularly important for the CRIS scheme. So there is the guidelines are available online, and it is important that businesses take the time to ensure that they have their tax clearance reference number. So that's accessible through ROS, and it must be in place in order to gain access to the scheme. There will be an appropriate appeals mechanism for businesses to follow if they feel they were unfairly refused access to the scheme. So that process will be available to customers. Conversely, if a business does make an incorrect or a false claim to revenue, whereby they access the scheme but they are ineligible for the scheme and amounts were unduly awarded, revenue will have the powers to charge interest and penalties where appropriate. It's also very important to note that the publication aspect of this scheme, so the name and addresses of all the businesses who access the scheme, will be published on the revenue website. So in terms of how the scheme is going, I've included this slide because I felt it was relevant for the Fáilte Ireland audience, in the sense that there is a trend against the Wild Atlantic Way. There's a significant number of registrations have been received from businesses, Dublin being the highest, but there are significant numbers in Cork, Kerry, Limerick, Galway, and up as far as Donegal. So there has been some take up for the scheme. We have approximately 12,000 businesses registered already in respect of about 13,000 premises. So we have about 2,000 applications currently being processed. So in terms of how to contact us, we very much prefer that you contact us using My Inquiries, and under the My Inquiries option, this is our online service whereby we communicate with customers. There is a dedicated option to select the COVID restriction support scheme, and it will allow you to ask questions or to have your claim dealt with directly by the team who are dedicated to the CRIS operation of the CRIS scheme. So it's the quickest way to contact us, and it's the way in which you'll receive the quickest response, because in most instances your case will require some level of research or analysis. So it's important that we have all of the information at hand while we're reviewing it. So also this is where you go if you have a question in relation to tax clearance, because you have to have tax clearance to access the scheme. The detail is there on the screen as to how to contact us with any specific details or any specific information that you want in relation to the scheme. So I hope that we've talked through some of the detail for the tourism sector, and I made clear some of the eligibility criteria in particular, and hopefully answered some of your questions so far. So thank you very much.
Okay, that's brilliant, Katie. Thanks a million. That is, there's fantastic detail in that. So look, I'll jump in here into questions if that's okay. Jackie and Anne-Marie, are you back on?
I am. I'm Jackie here.
Okay. Katie, I'm not sure if this would be your Jackie. That we have a few questions here just in around the logistics of the claim system. I might just run these by you real quickly because they should be straightforward enough. So it's when will they be able to enter a claim into Ross? And if you it's open, okay, great.
Yep.
And if you've already registered, do you have to wait until you're registered, your registration is approved before you enter?
Yes, so you do. You have to wait until your registration is approved, and in the majority of circumstances that will happen very quickly. So it will take at least 24 hours, but for everybody. So that's that's how long it takes for the systems to update. But otherwise, they are being dealt with very quickly.
Okay, and then sorry, I just knocked myself out there for a second. Oops. Then there's a few questions here around things like how many weeks can you claim for at a time, and if they're putting in a claim now, like the end dates for like because now obviously we're due to lift restrictions at December 1st, but they're not sure if that's going to be. So do you have any guidance around that in terms of like the weeks you can claim at a time and then the kind of end dates?
So at the moment, you can enter a claim up to the 1st of December from, depending on whether you went in at level 3 or level 5. So that depend on your specific circumstances, or level 4 actually was applicable in 1 or 2 counties for a period of time. But then from the 1st of December, it will be 3 weeks in advance. So you have to go in and reassess your eligibility every 3 weeks. And that obviously as well depends on how long the restrictions are in place. So if, and obviously we'd all be hoping this doesn't happen, if on say before the 1st of December, the government say we're extending the restrictions for 1 week, then at that stage, a business can go back in and make a claim for that particular week. And it all depends on when the restrictions are going to be lifted. So if in advance when you order 6 weeks, you can claim for 3 weeks and go back in and reassess your eligibility and put in a claim for 3 weeks. But it depends really on the restrictions ending.
Okay, but for now, business will work on the premise that it's December 1st and then they're starting.
December 1st, and it's one claim.
One claim. Okay, so all right, so that answers that question. Do you submit multiple claims for each week? But really, they'll do one claim for now, and then they'll do it for 3 weeks at a time. Is that correct?
Yeah, because you're going to be doing it prospectively in advance. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, so that covers that. Okay, I think that's most of those ones on the just logistics around. Yeah, can you remind us how long CRIS goes on for? I think it's level 3 upwards, but I recall something about lower levels being applicable to some businesses.
Yeah, so if you think at the moment, as I understand it, and this all depends on the Living with COVID plan and the government restrictions are actually put in place, but at the moment a nightclub will be restricted at level 1.
Okay.
So they could possibly apply at level 1. Then if you're talking about how long it runs up to, it's due to end at the moment on the 31st of March, but it may be extended. We don't know, like at the moment it ends on the 31st of March.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
And I think on the most recent guidelines, you have quite a bit of detail in around the kind of the claim periods and the payment areas and all of that. So it's worth kind of checking those out. Okay, so now some more probably specific questions. We have the company's tax clearance up to date, but I'm behind on my own. Will this affect the application?
Yes, so basically, I'm not so sure about the tax clearance being up to date. The company's taxes may be up to date, but to qualify for tax clearance, it's the company, like we'd also check connected persons, which would be director if they hold 50% shareholding in a company, or say if they had partnerships or something like that. So, as I said, your taxes for the company might be up to date. I'm not sure that your tax clearance would be up to date. That would be dependent, but you have to have a tax clearance cert to apply.
Okay, so they should probably put in a query then under my inquiries, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
My
But
business
there's
earns,
also,
sorry, go ahead, Jackie.
sorry, yeah, there's actually also some very good information on the Revenue website on tax clearance. It's
Okay.
actually in, say, starting a business, tax clearance, and connected persons. So just there's some information there that may be helpful.
Okay, brilliant. My business earns under 37,000, so I'm not registered for VAT. Am I still eligible for CRIS?
Yes, so you don't actually have to be registered for VAT to qualify for CRIS. You have to be carrying on a business and have a turnover from that business activity where your customers are restricted or prohibited from entering those premises. So yes, you will qualify if your turnover is under 37 and you're not registered for that.
Okay. And I think I don't know if you mentioned this already, Katie, is the EWSS subsidy regarded as income in terms of calculating the 75% plus reduction in
No.
turnover? No.
No.
Okay, perfect. Then we have yeah, we have a few different kind of queries in here. Like it's about, you know, the way the turnover is calculated on a weekly average throughout 2019. There's a few different queries where there might not have been income for the whole of 2019. Like for one, it was on an individual was on maternity leave, so they were only operational for 19 weeks of the year. Somebody else, the landlord, had closed down the business for refurbishment, so it was closed for 3 months. So there's a few different questions in and around that if they didn't have a full year's trading on 2019. How is that handled?
So basically, I'm going to assume they were in business for the full 12 months of 2019, that the accounts are done up for a 12-month period.
Okay.
Now, what I would say about particular cases is those are, like say, it would be a good idea to contact us via my inquiries.
Okay.
With those nuances. But if you're doing up accounts for a 12-month period, they're your 2019 accounts. Whereas, say, if a business commenced partway through 2019, then it's for the period that business commenced, because they would have had 12 months trading in 2020. But on specifics like that, it would be a good idea to contact us via my inquiries.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. This might be too specific, maybe not. It's would a rented premises qualify as a business premise? I guess it doesn't matter whether it's rented or not, as long as they operate from a business premise.
Yeah, no, like a rented premises would qualify. I've actually seen another query come in there, Helen, and it might be a good idea to address it now.
Okay.
Someone's asking if rent is part of their turnover. Rent is assessed at a case case 5. Yeah. So that won't actually qualify for turnover. And we actually received a different query in, and it's also probably a good one to address now as well, is say someone in 2019 received social welfare for part of the year, and they were asking, is that part of their turnover? So again, that would not form part of your turnover, because it wouldn't be turnover from your business activity. While it is taxable income, maybe it wouldn't be turnover from your business activity.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Yep.
There's one here, like it's quite specific, but I guess in general, if a business did not open in July when restrictions were lifted due to kind of personal considerations around their own, like kind of age and that type of thing, but it wasn't physically restricted from closing, from opening, are they eligible? But I think that sounds as if that would be more of a personal choice than it wasn't part of the living with COVID plan. Okay.
You have to be restricted, and like basically when we talk about restrictions, we're not talking about the 2 meter restrictions, the social distancing. It's more, say, if a restaurant or a pub could only have 15 people outside, that would be considered significantly restricted.
Okay, so it's actually you're restricting people from physically entering the building as opposed to the general impact of COVID
of the
restrictions
pandemic.
of
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Okay. And this is back to what you had mentioned about seasonal businesses, Katie. Business would normally stay open during the Christmas period, but this year probably won't reopen until March 2021. Are they still eligible? Like they're not going to reopen as soon as the restrictions change?
So this would depend, say, if we were to take an example of a hotel and they could prove that they had bookings for, say, November, December, then during the restricted period, they're entitled to make a claim.
Okay.
So it's the season. So they do say there is an intention there to trade again. But if it's the case of that they had closed at the start of September and they were not going to open in October, November, December, January, for say for the next couple of months, then their turnover wouldn't be affected. Their turnover was always going to be zero for those couple of months.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But if say, because I know a lot of businesses this year, they were planning on maybe staying open that bit longer because they obviously weren't opened until July. So if I understand what you're saying, as long as they can prove that like they had bookings or that they had intended to open, then they will be able to apply.
Then they can apply. Yeah.
Okay, great. There's a business here and their accounts run from April 19 to March 2020. So do they have to still look at kind of January to March 19 and then they're April to December 19?
So basically we have issued guidance in the CRS guidelines. So we have given the option that you can take, say, a pro rata of your previous set of accounts, say, so be 3 months of your March 2019 and 9 months of your March 2020. But in some circumstances, because of the pandemic, so if you would say a year end, the 30th of April or the 30th of June 2020, your circumstances are obviously affected badly by the pandemic for a number of months trading. You can actually look to your actual income then for 2019. So you can look at your actual rather than your pro rata.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
So it's what's like say in those particular circumstances, I suppose you use the pro rata, but if you think that significantly impacts your business, then you can use your actual turnover.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. This one might be too specific. It's about a tourist office that actually operates as a shop because they sell the tours. That actually might be one you probably send to my inquiries. I think.
My inquiries, I think it is, Helen.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Sorry, I'm reading through these as I go, so I'm kind of I'm figuring them out as I go too.
Helen, I think you actually were asking me about group hotels earlier.
Yeah,
as well.
I was actually. That's the one I was actually just looking for there. And it was for a hotel group. So will the scheme eligibility be assessed for each hotel in the group, or is it for the entire holding, the entire group holding?
So it's going to be per premises. So if you had, say, for example, a hotel in South Dublin, a hotel in North Dublin, and maybe a hotel in Meath, you would assess each premises based on specific restrictions in place at a particular point in time. Because I think, say, Dublin went into level 3 when the rest of the country was maybe at level 2.
Yeah. You
would have been able to apply for to a maximum of 5,000 for each of the business premises in Dublin. But obviously the Meath premises would have been outside those restrictions, so you couldn't have claimed for that particular premises.
Okay. So then this is probably the same but different. There's a business and they have 2 different locations, one in Cork and one in Dublin, but they have the same company name and the same VAT number. So are they considered, do they claim as one business or do they claim as 2?
No, so they would be claiming as 2 business premises. So in the screenshots Katie had there earlier, you'll see that you can enter the turnover per business premises. And say if Cork and Dublin were in 2 different levels and one level didn't affect your business trade, then you can only claim for one of those business premises when you're making that claim.
Okay, but for all intents and purposes, they're treated as 2 separate businesses.
They are, yeah. Yep.
Okay, so we have one here. Thanks a million for the really helpful guide. And the question here is in relation to so say the current restrictions, they stretch over 2 months. So for 1 month, they meet the turnover criteria, and then the other month they don't. How do they do that then? Do they just claim maybe the period of weeks, the claim period within the weeks, or sorry, within the month that they do?
Yeah, so basically they'd only claim it for the period that they do, so they'd reassess their eligibility.
Okay.
So there's the option to reassess your eligibility.
Okay, so then once say I'm in Helen's Hotel and I meet the turnover criteria now, but then whenever it kind of comes December 1st, then I reassess it to see whether I still meet it. Okay.
Yeah, but you need to meet all the other criteria then at that stage as well. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. I have a couple of questions in here just around like kind of that they'd register but they haven't heard anything or they don't see it on the portal. Any of those queries, I would say just put through to my inquiries. Yeah.
Yeah, just to mention on that, Helen, if somebody has applied to register with us and in a number of circumstances, we will contact them if we need any kind of clarification or any further information. We will make contact with them through my inquiries. So it's just to keep an eye on my inquiries to make sure that we haven't sent a communication through to them. So, and we do have large numbers to process. So we're getting through them as quickly as we can. But like Jackie was saying, it's a new scheme. So we do have quite a good throughput, but it's just definitely to keep an eye on my inquiries to make sure that there's nothing in there.
Okay.
And Katie, just I think I'm right in saying this. Some of the issues that are arising are people are putting in the yearly turnover, the monthly turnover, when they should be putting in the weekly turnover. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So in a lot of circumstances, particularly at the start in terms of registration, you're asked for your weekly turnover for the 2019 period. So what people had done was instead of putting in their weekly turnover, they'd put in their annual turnover in that field. So for those customers, we had to contact them. So we would have contacted them through my inquiries and asked them for either the basis of the calculation or the revision to the figures. So that was definitely one particular issue that we had. So there's a number, I suppose, of mistakes, for want of a better word, that have been made on the registration screens. So we've been working through those to have them resolved.
Okay, perfect. So it's really kind of like it's my inquiries is the main conduit for these. And then we have a couple in here. It looks as if people have put in claims, but they kind of put in the claim up to mid-November when they entered the claim. So instead of, they didn't realize they could do to December 1st. So did they just put in another claim now from, say, the 15th to the 1st?
I think they might have to wait 24 hours before they can put in the next claim from when they put in the previous claim. I know there's a certain amount of time the system needs for leave you put in the next claim. But once, I think it's 24 hours, then you can put in the claim up to the 1st of December. Yeah.
Okay. And then I may have missed this, but how long will it take after a claim is put in to get paid?
So it will, it's about 3 days. Yeah. It depends on your bank. So some banks are a day or so quicker than others, but 3 days is the maximum, I suppose, depending on the bank.
Okay. If your business isn't directly affected, e.g. a food supplier, are you eligible for CRIS?
No.
I think you have this example in the guidelines actually,
Yeah. They will be considered secondary businesses. At the moment, the scheme is aimed at, say, businesses where the customers are significantly restricted or prohibited from entering the business premises or business activity.
Okay. So if So then that would actually, we had a few inquiries into from businesses like the likes of caterers. So like that, they would provide catering to venues, whereas they wouldn't operate from a venue themselves. So they probably fall into that same category, would they?
They would appear to, but
Yeah.
if they want to send in a query. But what I suppose something to note is we will be updating the guidelines next week, and
Yeah.
we will be putting in more examples because there is nuances coming in. It's a new scheme. There are some queries we didn't anticipate, so we need a bit of time to think them through and give specific answers. But I suppose the first port of call really is the scheme is anchored in someone having a physical business premises and customers being restricted or prohibited from entering those premises.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, well, actually, that kind of falls into this one because we've had a few questions in. Is like weddings have obviously been hugely affected in all of this, but from wedding venues, so they're not affected, or sorry, they're not. It would be more that if their numbers are restricted. So I think in level 1 or level 2, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's 50 is the gathering number. So say my wedding
think it's 100 in level 1.
Oh, is it 100? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm getting my levels.
Yeah.
I need me living with COVID plan in front of me. I'll be like Leo taking it out of my pocket. So so with my venue, so say the restrictions are 100, but my venue can take 200, then I'm eligible. But it's not the fact that people maybe.
No, not necessarily.
Oh, right. Okay.
Like if you think about it, restaurants, pubs, basically all businesses at the moment have to operate under a 2-meter rule. So
yes, okay.
Like if you can have 100 people in your premises, it would have, like, obviously it's self-assessed, but you would have to look at are you significantly restricted?
Okay.
Like what we're talking about significantly restricted here are bars and restaurants where people are allowed 15 people outside or not allowed to operate. Say hotels at level 3 would qualify assuming they meet the 25% because their restaurants, their bar, their conferences, all of that are restricted. Whereas say a guest house or B&B at level 3 can have customers stay. Now their footfall might be down, but guest houses and B&Bs wouldn't be considered significantly restricted at level 3. So it's those sort of nuances. It's what is significantly restricted, Jen.
Okay. And then that, as you say, like, I mean, for those kind of queries, like you're still kind of working through the nuances of these.
Yep. And
things.
we will be updating the guidelines because I think it's very important for businesses to understand where they do sit in the levels. Now, as I say, it still is a self-assessed scheme, but we'll try and give as much guidance as we can in advance to businesses.
Okay.
And just to mention, Helen, I probably should have included in the presentation, the guidelines are available on the Revenue website and they're very extensive. So they give a lot of detail around the, different examples around secondary suppliers and, business to business, and a lot of what has been discussed so far. So it would be something that it's a very useful resource to people available on the Revenue website.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. I've 1 or 2 more here we'll do, and then I'm just conscious of time, so then we'll call it. And this would be, and it's back to talking about hotels. So say it's a hotel. So would a hotel, say a hotel with a nightclub. So would a nightclub within a hotel be treated as a separate trade and therefore entitled to make a single claim?
No, assuming the turnover is all returned within the hotel trade, which I'd imagine it is, then it will come down to the overall restrictions. Yeah. So possibly at level 3, but I would say it would be unlikely at level 1 and 2. I couldn't say for sure because it comes down to the different eligibility criteria, but I would say it would be unlikely at level 1 and 2.
Okay. And then actually the second part to that then was if they have a leisure centre that's located in a separate premises adjoining the hotel, there's membership and is open to the general public, But again, I guess that would come down to whether or not it's operated almost as a separate business, or is it part of one of the hotel revenue streams?
Yeah, and I suppose business premises come up here then as well. So how much of it is it a different business premise? That again, I would say is probably best to submit via my inquiries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would imagine, just given the levels that leisure centre would be affected at, they probably come in, I think it's 4 and 5, at which stage hotels are in at that stage anyway. So would it really come up?
So then they would
come
up. Yeah, I guess it's one of those. It's very specific kind of to the business.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do one more, and then do you still have to open? Okay. I think we've covered that. Intended to reopen. Yeah, that we just covered if a hotel runs dances and discos. Yeah, if your business turnover is reviewed in total, if there's two kind of revenue streams, one's totally closed and the other is down 50%. Again, it would be back to we just talked about it, if that's viewed as overall turnover, or if they're calculated as different streams.
Yeah, so assuming it's the one trade operated from the one premises, then it'd be looked at as a turnover as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, look at some of the others here, there's loads more coming in. Some of them are very specific. So what I'd say to anyone like that who have very specific questions, as Katie and Jackie have said, just go ahead and log those into my inquiries, because I think there's probably nuances there that we can't cover here. But look at, as I say, I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll hold it there for now, if that's okay. We're just over the hour, but look at huge thanks to the panel, to Anne-Marie and to Jackie and Katie. I mean, I think that was really kind of in depth and the detail, and really kind of clarification around a lot of the eligibility criteria and kind of what's in and what's out. And as we say with all of these schemes, like the devil really is in the detail, and like businesses are so diverse and there's so many different nuances there. So look at, thanks a million, guys, for doing all of that. To all of you, of course, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you find it useful. As I said to you at the start, we'll pull together an FAQ document for queries that we haven't been able to cover, and we'll work with Katie and Jackie and Anne-Marie and get an answer to some of those. And then as Katie mentioned about the guidelines, if you go to the government supports page on the Fáilte Ireland Support Hub, there's a link there to those CRSS guidelines, and that's a live link, so it's always the most up-to-date document. And what Revenue do is, as they update the document, they highlight the changes on the most recent version, so it's kind of easy. But as Katie said, there's actually some really good examples in there that make it much more, like it kind of clarifies around really how a lot of the claim periods, how a lot of the claims are made. There's screenshots of all of the registration pieces, and it would have quite a bit of detail. I know they covered off in seasonal businesses and that in quite a bit. So look at that, that's up there already. We'll put a recording of the session up there. We'll have the FAQs up there, and we'll put the slide deck up there as well. So that should all be, so it'll all be in one place for you. So look at that, just leaves me on behalf of Fáilte Ireland and myself to say thanks very much again, and take care. Bye-bye.